age is just a number, baby. Stop! Burn! Throw the fire! Throw the fire! Throw the fire!
Well. How's that moral high ground working out for you? I'm sure you've all heard the news by now, but if you haven't, then don't worry, I'll explain it to you once we cut to beige. Now, there have been a lot of people making statements about the whole thing, ranging from calm and meditative to simpering and cowardly, and I know you did not come to a Lily Pete video to hear a lecture about the importance of forgiveness without atonement. Instead, we're gonna beat up a sexual predator and his enablers. Roll the fucking tape. This is Zachary Kays, an MLP-centric YouTuber who goes by the moniker of Toon Critic. Zach is a member of the analysis community, or rather he was before this latest patch of controversy. Zach is an unhealthy member of the community. Aside from the fact that most of the content he puts out is some of the worst among Brony analysts, and that's saying a lot, when it comes to interacting with viewers, he is one of the most narcissistic, abusive, creepy motherfuckers in the community. Zach's history of manipulating and using people for his own gain has been well documented by former members of his Skype group, The Domain, and yes, terrible names are practically a staple of his brand. And his habit for dogpiling is something I've documented on this very channel before. Despite Zach having the clear and obvious signs of a bully, he has rarely, if ever, been subjected to any kind of punishment for his actions, until about last week when it was revealed that he had been grooming a teenager for cybersex for over a year. News of this broke out on Horse News on January 24th, and then a day later was confirmed by sources that you can actually trust. Zach did not deny any of this. He openly confessed to all of it in a Skype call with Josh, British Ninja, Keiichi, Irish John, Aeon of Dreams, and Solar Flare. His friends dragged him in upon hearing about the allegations and seeing all the evidence, which amounted to almost 500 screenshots. Josh and Ninja are the ones who speak to Zach the most, and you can see two very different approaches from both of them. British Ninja is a total boss and is simply not having any of Zach's shit. While he lets Zach explain his actions, it's clear that the explanation is merely a courtesy, and he has no intention of believing him. He calmly and rationally explains to Toon exactly what's going to happen as a result of his behavior. Meanwhile, Josh is constantly apologizing, repeating how much he doesn't want to do this, and talking about how big of a bone they're trying to throw Zach in spite of all of this, and treating him with the biggest kid gloves he possibly can.
Yikes.
However, upon being given the chance to explain himself, Zach immediately set about making excuses, talking about how he's made a mistake, how he's been dealing with depression, how he's done worse. No, seriously, that was apparently supposed to be a defense. He keeps bringing up the fact that he's a furry for some fucking reason, and at one point trying to argue that because the age of consent in the Philippines is 12, then this is all totes okay. And when you're trying to dispel accusations of pedophilia by arguing that there are government officials in other countries that are just as big of perverts as you are, just fuck. Fucking hell. Zach's open lack of remorse and flippant attitude for his own actions is nothing short of disturbing. With the way he talks about his actions, one could be forgiven for thinking that he was only guilty of some trivial wrongdoing, like telling someone to go jump off a pier. If it weren't for the fact that British Ninja has absolutely zero chill and actively drops the word pedophilia multiple times, it would be easy for someone to miss what he's done wrong going by this recording alone. That's how casual and flippant he is about the entire thing. It isn't until he's informed that everyone in the group is cutting off ties with him that any sort of worry or alarm enters his head. It would seem that despite the fact that he was directly confronted about his actual pedophilia, Zach expected that there would be no consequences for his actions, that the rest of the community would just sweep this all under the rug and carry on tomorrow like nothing had happened. Zach at one point remarks how if this were to go public, his career would be destroyed, despite the fact that his career had already been destroyed at this point. Zach expected, despite being caught red-handed, that there would be no consequences whatsoever. And I can understand why Zach would think that, because that is a luxury that he has enjoyed for literally years. As much as people reacted to this news with surprise and outrage, Zach has been a gropey pervert for a very long time. At conventions, he cannot keep his hands to himself and has been caught groping women more often than the president, even to the point of groping someone in front of their boyfriend and expecting to get away with it. According to several sources, Zach insisted that he had been seeing a therapist and had apparently been diagnosed with an inferiority complex. And Zach, You got ripped off there. I could have told you that for free. All this was lip service because Zack has a well-documented history of feigning improvement until people stopped giving him a hard time and then immediately reverting back to a screaming pustule on the wall. While Zack's friends had insisted he's changed his ways, he never actually did change because he never had to. Consequences were rarely lasting and people were very quick to sweep it under the rug so that all this drama would stop and things could go back to normal. This is a rampant problem in the analysis community. Nobody held this man accountable for his actions. Nobody fucking did anything about it. Everybody saw it, everybody knew about it. The fact that Zack was an abusive, mouthy pervert was effectively common knowledge, but nobody got off their ass to do anything. So Zack continued to get away with this for years, always coming back with another limp-handed excuse about making a mistake, and his friends would swallow it hook, line, and sinker. The message was loud and fucking clear. If you were abused, assaulted, or otherwise violated by this man and you expected to get any semblance of support from this community, you got to eat shit from the jar with a great big dessert spoon because they cared more about keeping themselves comfortable and avoiding drama above everything else. Zack's behavior has been well known and repetitive for a long time, and the people who were in the best position to hold him accountable for his actions did nothing until it got to the point of pedophilia, and the very act of doing nothing would have finally reflected poorly on them. Some of them would remark that Zack is a charismatic manipulator, but bullshit! Zack has historically been about as charismatic as Professor Quirrell, and his ability to manipulate his friends is entirely reliant on their eager willingness to sweep everything under the rug to avoid confrontation. They were complicit in all of this. Even now, despite this very much being the last straw for everyone else, Zack is still trying to find a sympathetic ear that will listen to him so he can continue to frame himself as a poor victim of circumstance who made a mistake. It got so desperate that he actually got his grandmother to call the other analysts and ask them to be extra special nice to him. And if you haven't already grasped that his rhetoric about having made a mistake is bullshit, perhaps this will convince you. This is not the first time he's done this. There was another teenager he groomed for cybersex whose story got out shortly after this one did, and it also had Skype logs at the ready. And not only did the person telling the story have Skype logs handy, they went ahead and did all of our work for us by contrasting them to the previous leaks, and the methods Toon used to groom this other girl are nearly identical. And also, I got a lovely testimonial on Tumblr saying that this goes back as far as 2006. Toon attempted to groom 3 teenagers into sexual activity, that we know of. He had apparently become so proficient at it that he developed a formula for coercing young people into sex using the same lines and the same excuses in almost the exact same order. This was no mistake. This was no being in a bad place. There was no depression. There was none of that shit. Mistake? What, did you fat finger your keyboard 2 million times in a row for a year? Because that's the only way that all of this could possibly be a mistake. And that's a pretty coincidental set of typos there if it is, you fucking liar. Being in a bad place? Are you ever not in a bad place? Because if we're to believe more recent allegations, and I do believe them, this behavior goes back as far as 2006. That's not being in a bad place. You are the bad place. Depression? Really? You're reaching for that fucking excuse? Even if you did have depression, which I severely doubt, that still wouldn't be anything close to acceptable. Depression doesn't make you groom teenagers for sex. If you have depression, get on antidepressants. That is a fixable problem that you have actively made the decision to not fix. This was a predator actively seeking out people to prey on, one who had gotten comfortable in a consequence-free environment and arrogant enough to believe he would never be caught. And if all that still doesn't convince you, Zack admits in that very same Skype call that he had a similar hookup with a 17-year-old who he says lied about her age, but at this point I'm convinced that that's bullshit and that he groomed this one as well. And this one actually went to the police, so Zack has been in trouble with the law regarding this behavior already and still went and repeated this behavior. So that's 3, possibly 4 teenagers that he's been caught coercing into sexual activity. If this really is a mistake, you certainly have a habit of making the same mistake over and over and over again and expecting to get away with it by giving a weak apology and pretending you've learned your lesson, what we academics call the Starlight Glimmer defense. At time of writing, Zack has allegedly been arrested, and likely at time of release he'll already be in prison. So it'll be easy for some people to say, well, there are consequences now, so problem solved, right? Well, no, because it never should have gotten this far. Zack has shown no remorse and has been trying to weasel out of it the moment he opened his fucking mouth, because that's what he's always done. He's always been able to admit to his mistakes, talk about how he needs help, pay lip service to improvement, and then go right back to it the moment everyone has quickly forgotten about it. We're about to see something here that really holds back any improvement in the community. People will not change if they don't have to. If they are not forced to change their ways, they'll continue doing what they're doing. If Zack can make excuses, feign improvement, and everyone forgets about it and then makes excuses for him, what reason did he have to stop? That environment of treating Zack with kid gloves is probably the only reason he confessed at all, because he thought he could pull the same old shit. And let's not forget that the story broke on Horse News, which means an alternative to that could have easily been to say, it's Horse News, it's obviously fake, and a good chunk of people would have believed that because Horse News is notorious for lying. Sure, they had the truth this time, but a stopped clock will be right twice a day. Zack had become accustomed to never having to face the consequences of his actions, and that meant he didn't have to change. And that's the important factor here, because if this kind of dragging through the mud happened the first time he groped someone or manipulated someone into sex, he likely would have been motivated to keep his fucking nose clean. And the fact that nobody could be bothered to until he crossed the one line that nobody can look good trying to defend is horrible. Shame on all of you, sitting there with your thumbs in your asses, doing nothing. I know you're probably thinking, but it got out this time, right? That's good, right? Sure, but not for them. The fact that this call of at least British Ninja dragging Zack through the mud got leaked was by pure happenstance. Josh didn't leak it despite recording it. He showed it to a few people asking them to keep quiet, and one person had the spine to say, "Lol no." Josh views the leaking of this call as a mistake.
Oh, you are just the worst type of person.
You know, it's a good thing Josh likes fire so much. He's going to be seeing a lot of it in about 60 years. Whoever actually leaked it, good on you. That was the right decision, because record of Zack confessing to the crime and the sheer lack of remorse for his own actions was the motivation his other victims needed to come forward. So that's the person who leaked the call, British Ninja, the girl he was sexting with who released all the screenshots, and anybody else who came forward or immediately dragged him through the mud with no mercy whatsoever. The ones who were making excuses, trying to keep everything from going public, or just flat out being wishy-washy and limp-handed about it, and thereby trying once again to shield Zack from consequences, fuck you. That is what an enabler looks like. If this hadn't gone public, Zack would have had plausible deniability and would have been able to shake this off in a few weeks once the majority of people got bored of it. Now, this is where things get a lot heavier, because as much as people would like to think that justice has been served and things will go back to normal, they won't. Putting aside the fact that sexual abuse is only just having a light shined on it in the past year, this goes beyond the politics of the issue. To put it as blunt as possible, the Brony fandom has a pedophilia problem. The two largest sites for fan content, FimFiction and Derpy Boru, are packed to the brim with child pornography that just barely skirts US federal law on a technicality. There are a large number of fan artists and fan writers who produce child pornography and get away with it because they just barely stay within those boundaries. The fandom uses the term FOLCON as a euphemism for child pornography, rationalizing that because the characters involved aren't human, then that makes it completely okay. In fact, both of these websites only prevent you from posting material featuring humanized children, a limp-handed rule that wouldn't exist if they were not legally required to have it. These sites have groups dedicated to this content that reaches terrifying numbers. And that's before we factor in the prevalence of Chan boards in the Brony community. And when you challenge people on this, the excuses just pile on, and in many cases they start changing the subject. They know this material is child pornography, so they try to make it an argument about what's really damaging to minors and how all of this is just harmless fun. And failing that will often evoke percentages to make the sheer volume of it sound smaller than it actually is. On Derpy Boru in particular, child pornography makes up about 0.8% of the material on the site, and some people use that as a defense against any kind of criticism. It doesn't work because 0.8% is higher than 0, and 0.8% equates to 13,000 individual images. Do you know what the acceptable number of individual images of child pornography is? It's 0. 13,000 is way off from that mark. None of this ever gets talked about because the community at large has the worst priorities ever. This discussion is constantly being shot down because individual bronies are more worried about potentially being lumped in with the freaks than they are about the safety and well-being of children. There's no shortage of people praying that this story about Zack not reach the mainstream media because they think it'll generalize the fandom. Here's one jackass insisting that the whole thing is a false flag to discredit the fandom because ponies are for little girls. They're terrified that the mainstream media will take it as an excuse to label all bronies as pedophiles, and so they're content to continue sweeping a rampant problem under the rug until it has grown so large as to dwarf everything around it. And as long as that attitude persists, this will never stop. It will happen again. Zack was not the first, he certainly will not be the last. there will be another sick fuck who thinks they can avoid getting caught and will creep around the next convention looking for someone to prey on. And we will not know who it is until it's too late. Brony conventions are not a safe place for children. The fandom at large is not a safe place for children, and bronies are content to keep it that way because they value the perception of the fandom's reputation more than its actual reputation. I'm well aware that Zack has a lot of fans and friends who are still defending him, asserting that he needs forgiveness and all this public humiliation is going over the line, or worse off, gaslighting people by talking about forgiveness for your own sake. Yeah, you can have one of those. Zack has been given multiple opportunities to stop being a creepy, abusive, predatory fuckhead. Opportunities he has routinely refused while putting on a facade of improvement before settling right back into his terrible behavior. And even his behavior outside being a sexual predator has been horrible. He has allowed harassment and bullying to go unchecked, and has instigated it himself on multiple occasions, ran his own Skype group where bigotry and simpering nice guy rhetoric was allowed to run amok. He has consistently behaved like a bitchy prima donna crying harassment the moment anyone dares criticize him, and abuses his friends almost as badly as he abuses hashtags. He really can't possibly suffer enough as far as I'm concerned. Fuck him. I hope he gets brutally beaten to death in prison. And Zack, just one last thing, because I know you're watching this. I was understandably skeptical when I heard that Horse News was the one to break this story, and I told people I needed to conduct my own investigation if they wanted a video on it. What I have discovered, as you've seen, goes beyond this one incident and showcases over 10 years of predatory behavior and pedophilia on your part. And I likely wouldn't have been in the position to make this video with the connections I needed to get real confirmation if it hadn't been for the fact that a year ago, Patchwork Heart confided in me all the horrible things you've done to them, like manipulating them into sexual roleplay, constantly misgendering them and refusing to make the effort to correct yourself, and pressuring them into giving you free art assets in exchange for exposure. I guess what I'm saying is, maybe you wouldn't be in this position if you had just respected the artist.
You enjoyed that. You're damned right.